I'm Lee Thompson. I'm the principal of the upper school. This is the beginning of my 12th year. We measure Utah time in my two children because we moved here when my older daughter, Abby, was entering first grade, and she's now a senior. And my younger daughter, Sophia, who is in fifth grade, was 5 weeks old when we moved here. So I know the school from all divisions, having been through the experience as a parent as well. So today during our presentations, we're gonna tag team, give you information about the school as a whole and about the middle school. So let me have my comrades introduce themselves.
I'm Wendell Thomas, and I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and my wife and I have 4 kids at Rowland Hall, a senior, 9th grader, and 7th grader, 3 boys, and our youngest is a 5th grader, and she's a she.
And I'm Tyler Fonero. I'll use the joke I used last week. I have 211 middle schoolers, and I have 2 kids in lower school. Tessa's in 3rd grade and Josie's in 1st grade, and this is all our 4th year at Rowland Hall, California expats. And you'll be hearing more from me later in the presentation.
Great. So just before we get started, as we're in the library, I noticed something I wanted to point out to you, which is a couple of weeks ago, Peter Hayes passed away, who was a longtime biology teacher here, and we had his memorial service this weekend. And 2 of his pieces of art are here, one to my right, and the other in the back, which really is kind of pertinent to today. It's entitled Learning is Work, and it's made up of grade books that Peter used throughout his teaching career. And as Doug Wortham, who gave a beautiful talk at the service, reminded us that just about everyone who Peter taught is probably represented in some way on that painting, that piece of art up there. So I just wanted to point that out. So quick question. We sent out an email, so I'm gonna ask you to actually raise your hand and out yourself here, that had an article attached to it. How many of you actually read that article? Raise your hand if you read it. Okay, pretty good. All right. We also sent a video, and I think there was a video associated with that. Show us if you're a visual learner. Did you watch the video? Okay. And so we're going to actually show you a different video to start the process today that's about 4.5 minutes of an introduction to the idea of mindsets, including Carol Dweck herself, who was the author of the article that we sent you. So just that will give us all a common grounding to start with. Wendell's going to put it on for us. So again, hopefully, whether you did your homework or not, that gives you a refresher on what one of the significant ideas is we're talking about this year. To put in context what we are doing as a school, about a year ago, we adopted and began implementing the new strategic plan for the next 4 to 5 years at the school. And the first of the 3 pillars of that strategic plan says that in order to improve the teaching and learning environment, we want to incorporate research, the latest research, into our experience as teachers and learners at the school. So one of the things that we typically do every summer is assign a summer reading book for faculty that we then come back at the beginning of the year and talk about. So over the summer, over this past summer, faculty chose between 3 books all around this idea of growth mindsets and fixed mindsets, with the idea of giving us all a similar language that we can talk about and that we can also talk about with the kids. During the first week of school, I spoke to the students about growth mindset and basically sort of did a short version of this research to give them that sense of the power behind what you do. Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And if you stop and think about that for a minute, this is a 100-plus-year-old idea from Henry Ford that certainly predates him, that talks about where you are in your head has so much impact in terms of what you can accomplish. Now, there was an article about a week ago that from Carol Dweck kind of defending her thesis and her research against attacks that said, well, is it really just as simple as if you believe you can do well that suddenly it's just magic and you learn? And absolutely not. One of the key components is reflecting, looking at what you're doing and what your process is, and recognizing that if you're not making the process that you would like, that means there's an adjustment to be made. So in a school setting, that means students reflecting on what they're doing, teachers also reflecting on how they're doing and how their students are doing. So from that first goal of the strategic plan, we began with the summer read, putting the idea of mindsets on the table for our faculty and for our kids. And the way that we're going to talk today, one of the ways we're going to talk today about how we're actually fostering a growth mindset is through formative assessment. Now, assessment we usually think about in a school setting is, hold on. I don't know if you can read those from in the back, but I'll give them to you anyway. So we talk about summative assessment is what you probably typically think of when you think about school. And that is, it's an assessment of learning. How much have students learned relative to specific targets at a particular point in time? So you're measuring the end goal. So for example, we've gone through chapter 1 of the geometry textbook. I give you a test at the end of the chapter. How much did you learn? That gives you a snapshot of one sort of summative moment, the end of chapter 1. Formative assessments, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, is this idea of assessment for learning as opposed to assessment of learning. That idea that how can we use assessment information to help students learn more? So again, summative assessment summarizes that learning at a specific point in time after students have had, in the ideal world, summative comes after they've had time to practice and receive feedback from each other or from the teacher, typically at the end of an instructional unit. And that, the purpose of formative assessment is really what we think of as grades. It's how do you measure how successful or not a student is in the course. And as Wendell created this slide, he said that's sort of like news. This is what's happened, okay? Chapter 1 is finished. Formative assessment is something that as teachers you're doing early and often during the learning process. So it's giving you continuous descriptive rather than evaluative feedback. So if you're doing an assignment along the way, you get to learn, do I already know this? Do I not know this? Do I kind of half know this? What do I need to do to make sure I know it by the end? It really is important because here's where that idea of teamwork, which is something that I think Roland Hall does very well, becomes incorporated into a daily basis in the classroom. You're really almost as a team, teacher, student, and class, trying to master some material by the end with the understanding that you're going to learn something along the way. So if you think about if summative assessment was the news, this feedback is like advice. What do I need to do better tomorrow to improve on my performance today? So the strategic plan implementation committee decided that the tool that we would adopt to study during the course of this year, and it will go into next year, is this idea of formative assessment. And to give you a couple of examples, and then I'll hand it over to Wendell. Formative assessment might look in a classroom like a math class. We've taught a lesson, and at the end of the period, I stop 5 to 10 minutes early and say, all right, here are 2 sample problems of the concept that I taught you today. And you do them before you leave the room. It's called an exit ticket. As a teacher, I then take these 15 little sheets that the students gave me, and I look, and if all 15 kids got it right, I'm going to feel pretty confident that I taught it successfully and that kids came away with it. They're going to be able to do their homework. If, however, I look at this sheet and I say, wow, only 3 kids are able to perform the task that I asked them to do at the end of class, that gives me information that as a teacher, I got to go back and I need to do something a little bit different tomorrow, maybe reteach this material, take a different approach at it, and give kids another chance. One of the nice things about technology is there's a slew of programs that we can use to give this feedback regularly as you're going along. Elisa Poppin, who was teaching AP Biology, my daughter was in her class last year, and she tells this story of she had gone through, the kids had read a chapter, and she had done some lecturing, and she put a series of multiple choice questions up on the screen and asked kids to click in anonymously and say, okay, what's the answer, A, B, C, or D? And she literally put a question up there that not one student got right. And she thought, well, that's pretty good information because I kind of figured they would know this already. Immediately can go back and say, how do I improve on my teaching of that concept, which of course is building to the larger concept. You can also do this the old-fashioned way. You'll see a lot of teachers, again, maybe in a math class where I might give you an individual whiteboard and a marker and say, here, do this problem for me, and then hold up the whiteboard so I can see how many people got it right and wrong. This very quick assessment takes the temperature of where the class is at any given moment. And I think, as the upper school principal, what I see in kids, and I'm sure any of you who have had upper school students or kids who have gone on to college, is that one of the things we worry about is this intense pressure and fear over every single assessment we give kids, whether it's completing the homework, making sure they get it done for points, whether it's that 5-point quiz or that 10-point quiz that we give at the end of the week, or the test or the paper, that there's great anxiety around getting the grade. And what we hope to do through the use of the mindsets, the growth mindset, and the use of formative assessment is to say, this shouldn't be a mystery. When you get to the end of the unit, you should know exactly what you know. I, as a teacher, shouldn't be surprised by any sort of result because I should know where you have been all along the learning process. And if we are able to transform a culture from fear and anxiety about grades into embracing the process of learning, what's fascinating is that the research shows that the kids who have a growth mindset and learn along the way from their mistakes, they ultimately do better in the end anyway. So even though their target may seem to have changed to not be the end result, the process and learning makes it stick in such a way that ultimately they do better. So I'm going to hand this over to Wendell Thomas for a minute. He's actually going to do a little participatory exercise with you, so put your thinking caps on.
So I'm going to demonstrate a formative assessment tool that teachers might use in their class. And in fact, this is a tool that I used in my own class last week. Not this question, it was a different question because we were talking about something else. This is called a concept test question. And Lee mentioned technology and using clickers. These are often called clicker questions for that reason. But you can do this low tech, and that's what we'll do today because we don't have enough clickers for everyone today. A concept test question is a prelude to doing what Eric Mazur, who's a professor of physics at Harvard, calls peer instruction. And peer instruction is a very well established by research effective tool for doing formative assessment. So I'm going to ask you to read the question, think about it for 1 minute. That's important. And in 1 minute, I'm going to ask everyone to hold up 1, 2, 3, or 4 fingers to share your answer with me. And then we'll see where to go from there. Can the people in the back read it? Michelle? Is everyone ready to respond? So I'm going to count to 3, and then I would ask everyone to hold up your hand with 1, 2, 3, or 4 with your answer. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're going to do peer instruction because a lot of people did not have a correct response. And this is the goal, that we write a question that a significant portion of students are going to be struggling with, and we're going to hope to correct some misconceptions with a concept test question. So what we need to do now is you need to find someone who had a different response from you and spend 2 or 3 minutes trying to convince your partner that your response is correct and that their response is not. So find someone with a different answer. It can be a group of 2 or 3 people. So there's some interesting conversations, and if we're going to do peer instruction like this is the way a classroom is going to look. It's going to be a little chaotic. Now, our classes aren't this big. Eric Mazur's lecture halls are this big, and he'll have a couple of TAs working the room with him. But for our teachers doing an activity like this, they're going to get to hear every single student chime in about the topic that they're talking about that day. And that's a powerful tool for a teacher to use. So I want to check the room again and see where we are with the question. So again, if you have changed your mind, that's fine. If you've kept it the same, that's fine. But everyone raise your hand. Tell me if you want 1, 2, 3, or 4. There's a lot of 3s now, and that's the correct response. And Mazur's research shows that on average, about 4% of people who change their mind will go from a correct to an incorrect response, but nearly 30% of students who change their mind go from an incorrect to a correct response. And to get that kind of gain in a few minutes and have students do that on their own, it's a powerful tool for learning.
But I think what was interesting that you started with all different answers, and you told me for some reason I was doing kind of a test like that. It was a coincidence last time that I get overwhelmed with these type of questions and answers. And what I was looking at what was going on, and I think what the learning experience was great. We had one person that went through the process at this table with the neighbor, So I was like, here we're trying to use our intelligence by intuitively answer the question, and most likely we're going to get it wrong because I don't know much about all this stuff, which we did, right? A lot of us got it wrong. But what was happening with the teamwork is that we were paying attention to the person who went through the process, and we actually got the right answer, not really by using our intelligence and our knowledge, but by following the person who had the experience in the process. So for me, it was really inspiring because suddenly we got the right answer. By,
Wendell, you're going to have to tell the person to speak up. No one back there can hear. Or summarize.
Well, what I like to summarize is I experienced, first you're trying to answer the question with your knowledge and intelligence, which, not in every case you're going to get right. In my case, I'd probably get it wrong because you're not sure about molecules.
Oh, really?
But by having someone on our team that had the experience that went through the process, the real life process, we were able to listen to that person and think, well, since she went through the process, she understood the end result and got the right answer. I don't know if that makes any sense to you guys. But it made sense to me that we were learning the answer, not just using our intelligence, but listening to someone that went through the process.
Through what process? I'm not sure what you mean.
The food. She has a neighbor who has
A neighbor who couldn't digest food.
Yes, right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Now-
by real life experience, we were able to find the right answer instead of just using our knowledge or nutrition or whatever.
There are a lot more teachers in the room than just the teacher. And I just want to leave you with one question to think about before passing this on to Tyler. The the students, the parents that did not get the answer right initially were convinced of the correct response. They learned something. They got something out of this. But what about the students who got the answer right initially and then convinced people of the correct response? Did they get something out of this? I think a really powerful tool for those people as well. Thanks for your help.
Thanks, Wendell. Thanks, Wendell. Is this projecting or is it no? So it's not.
It's recording. It's recording.
Oh, it's recording. I'm like, what? Like, I'm the high tech guy. And for the 4% of us who had the right answer and then talked ourselves out of it, we learned something as well, because that was me on that one. It's like, oh man, I figured I outsmarted myself or outthought myself. So this is the time for the check for understanding, and I'm going to ask a formative question to see how we are on this topic. Can I have one audience member share their version or what they think a summative assessment is? Raise your hand. Who has the courage to take a risk? And oh, yes. Thank you, Melissa. Yes.
A final exam that tests your knowledge of the math concepts that you just learned.
Well done. Perfect. Meeting my learning goals of this assembly today. A second one to take a risk and share what a summative assessment might be at Roland Hall or in school.
You mean formative? That was summative.
I'm sorry, formative assessment. Thank you. Formative. Come on, let's take some. Yes! Awesome. Little checks along the way to make sure the teacher who's driving the train of information and learning is making sure that we know what's going on. Okay, those are two questions that we say in the middle school are meeting our learning goals. I'm going to push you and ask a question that's exceeding your learning goals if you really understand this, and that is, as a parent, what can you do to help foster a growth mindset for yourself and children at home? Oh, we've already got it. Yeah, go for it.
Well, I'm thinking of the children right now.
That's fine.
Because I jumped ahead of you.
Yes.
With these, they come to you with a problem. Instead of telling them how to do it, you would ask them how they might approach it.
Great. That's a great. When they're coming to you for help, instead of showing them how to do the answer or giving them the answer, is pushing it back on them. It's a good therapy trick. Answer a question with a question. And seeing what they can figure out from themselves. Because what I'm learning from this session, and I hope you all as well, it's really not about that right answer. That's what Wendell just showed us, but it's about the process there. Another thing you can do as a parent, and Jennifer Blake, our associate head, volunteered this yesterday at a meeting, to your growth mindset, is role modeling for your student about taking risks, about taking on new things that you're not that comfortable with, or you were told when you were in 6th grade choir class that you couldn't sing. But as an adult, she's going to now host a karaoke party. Well, and in fairness to Jennifer, she's not going to host a karaoke party. She's probably going to just do it by herself, just to get over the hump. And then maybe the second time, she's going to do it with her husband. And maybe the third time, she'll do it with her daughter. And then she'll realize she's not as bad of a singer as she thinks. Or maybe she is a little tone deaf, but that's okay. She still can get better. Because that's what the whole mindset thing is. It's not about an achievement thing, it's about growth. It's we've been talking a lot about mindset, but the key there is growth. You can always get a little bit better at something. I like to think, not to be negative with words, but you think about a fixed mindset is almost a defeatist mindset, because it's saying before you even try, like, I'm just not good at this, versus a growth mindset, which is a little bit more opportunistic, like, ooh, maybe if I try this, I will at least get better, and thinking about the big picture. I do want to share, though, that it's not just all rosy all the time, because a good friend of mine, I label myself an optimist. That's who I am by nature, and I like to have friends who, I don't like to think of them as pessimists, because that's so negative, but I like the term realist, because that's more of a perspective like, yeah, that's fine that we're going to do this, but there's a process. So being a realist is important for you as a parent and your students as well, because the growth mindset might say, awesome, if we try hard enough, we can do anything. Let's take 7 AP classes this term. Let's take compacted math and be on 3 traveling athletic teams. But being a realist is also knowing what you can do over time, okay? Because you don't all have to do. We don't want to send the message that if you just try harder, you'll be successful. Because it's not just about trying harder, which is what Lee mentioned with the Dweck article, or maybe it was Wendell that just recently came out. Because it is a process as well. Okay, so when we talk about, when you as parents, you buy in and you understand this growth mindset, it's like, you can take this on. We have Dave Sampson, our assistant principal in the high school, and Annie Barton and myself in the middle school, when we have conversations with students about setting goals for themselves, maybe you can really push yourself in our traditional math curriculum necessarily than jumping into a compacted math curriculum that you actually hadn't learned the material yet. So there's a difference between being ready for something and wanting to do something in school. So we talk a lot about differentiation with our students, and it's not just teaching different things, but making sure students understand their own goals. So those are some of the things that we're working on in the middle school with our students. Many of you know we've piloted a new grading system. We still have grades. This is a misconception. We have grades. We actually have 3 times as many grades in the 6th grade as we have in the past. And what we've done is actually separated things into 3 categories, so students are actually learning the skills needed so that they can be better and more successful in school. If you see Roland Hall's mission statement, it talks about us as a college preparatory school. Well, in the middle school's job, our job is to be a high school preparatory program. So we have a lot of things with, and I'll show you a little bit about, that's the wrong button. One more. There we go. That's really small. So there's 3 grading categories we've created for the 6th grade pilot program that really tease out what we all assumed was a grade, which I like to call a target of achievement in the traditional sense. And when the kids go to school, chances are we hope they want to learn, but the most powerful feedback they're getting is what? Grades. Okay? The most powerful feedback they're getting is grades. And the traditional grading system is not giving them all the feedback that we want them to learn in middle school to be strong learners. We want them to come to school wanting to learn, not to how do I get an A. Okay? So we've created 3 categories around the mindset themes as well. We've got academic mastery, which is a lot of those summative assessments. Do you know the stuff that we want you to learn, the content? And we're not padding that with participation or quizzes or homework checks. That's 100% summative grade. There's also 100% summative grade in productivity and in contributions. These are the other things. For example, in productivity, resourcefulness. You know, how do you go about that problem? She mentioned, I'm not going to give her the answer. I'm going to figure out how to do that. In this day and age of smartphones, who was the general in the War of 1812, you can find in about 12 seconds on your phone. So what our learning switches, and how resourceful are we, and that's part of our productivity that we're trying to teach our middle schoolers. And lastly, the contributions. Inclusion and equity, for example, that's the second bullet down. That's one of the things that we're trying for students to learn. Why is that important? Not just because we all want to be kind and nice, but that's the world. Okay, we had everyone introduce themselves so you felt included in this environment today. We want you to be part of our community and not just we're the only people that are important up at the front. Okay, so those may not feel like traditional middle school goals, and that's the point. We want to evolve and try to have our students learn things at an early age, what's going to be powerful for them as they take them on to high school. And I guarantee you, if these students really understand their own learning, and there's 211 students in the middle school, and they all have different goals, they're going to be more successful no matter what their goals are if they're understanding these buckets and the growth mindset. Because it's not about comparing themselves to others, they're comparing themselves to themselves. Okay? I was going to share a story. I'll do that another time. I do want to share one book that Joanne Deek is a educational researcher, brain scientist. She's worked at schools. She worked at a girls' school in Ohio. She's way up here with all her research, but she wrote a children's book about the brain. If you haven't seen Your Fantastic Elastic Brain, it is so tied into brain growth mindset, and she wrote this book 8 or 9 years ago. I highly recommend it to those with lower school kids or middle school or even high school. It really, like elastic bands that stretch when you pull them, even things that are hard at first or that you don't like to do or that you don't do very well, all those things get easier when you keep trying. Little kids know this. My first grader really thinks she's good at kickball. Okay? But she's going to keep trying. And at some point, and it's usually around late lower school, middle school, where the self-doubt and they start looking around and go, oh gosh. But and the brain switches. Instead of saying, well, I'm just going to keep pushing, I'm going to quit soccer because or volleyball. Tessa's so much better than me. I'm walking in the way. Okay? Rather than I'm going to make my own goals.
We're not like this amazing school that no one else knows about this. So the Stanford report, the Harvard report on education is all saying they're trying to move their professors more towards formative assessment. So the younger your kids are, the more likely they are going to, in fact, see this in college. And Richard Badenhausen, the chair of our board of trustees at Westminster College, they're doing more and more formative assessment at Westminster College today. And so, yes, that's the style it is now, but that we're not alone in this. This is where people are moving. Carol Dweck's work is internationally being applauded, and colleges, good colleges, are looking at how they're going to do that. And let me give one example. I visited Brian Birch's that class in which he used formative assessment 20 minutes into the class. He could see his lesson he thought was going well. It was a good lesson, but he saw some questions from kids. He kept getting questions. And so I said, something isn't going right here. So he could have gone back and retaught it, or he could have checked with a formative assessment. He did a quick formative assessment and saw that 5 of the 14 kids were struggling. And if he'd gone back and just retaught it, the other 9 kids were already going to say, I know this stuff, back to your point. So he saw that. He stopped the class and said, I'm going to take the kids that want some more help like this, and the rest of you can, if you want to start on your homework, or he gave them some other interesting things to do. They did that. They were now re-engaged because I could see their interest going down. As they went off, he worked with those 4 kids for just 5 minutes, came back to the class, and the whole class moved over. He stopped right in the middle of his class to then take that opportunity, because it wasn't 13 of the 14 that didn't know, in which case it was obvious to go back, as Wendell said, if everyone doesn't know. And it wasn't one where he could say, okay, I'm going to meet with you afterwards. And then I asked the kids in terms of, well, is it hard for you to do this? Because he didn't have the clickers that Alyssa had. So he told me he wanted to get some, so he didn't have to. He was just asking the kids to raise their hand. So I asked some of the kids, I said, well, we do it so often it doesn't embarrass us. And so it told me that this is a regular ongoing thing he's doing in class, and I was so impressed with his shifting gears, middle of class, differentiated for these kids, brought them up, and then moved the whole class forward. The kids that got it were thrilled. They didn't want to go over it again, and the kids that needed the help got it. So it was a great example of him stopping the class and doing it.
One thing I would add to that is that formative assessment also doesn't begin and end with the teacher-student relationship. A lot of the research talks about how, as a student, can you perform formative assessment upon yourself, right? So something as simple and basic as a flashcard is a form of formative assessment. That as a student, we see a lot of students who think that what I'm supposed to do is reread the material, right? If I just reread chapter 5, somehow I'm going to remember it. But what the research tells us is that gives you a false sense of understanding because it's familiar and it's in your brain and you think, oh, I got this, I know this. But if you create tests for yourself, learning tests, you do the chapter review test in the back of the book. You create, when you're reading, you stop and say, what do I understand about this? That's formative assessment that you can do for yourself. So even if you do get into that college class where I'm going to be measured on a midterm exam, a final exam, and a paper, you as a student will be equipped with strategies that you can employ on your own to formatively assess your own learning. Did you?
It's just interesting. I'm sitting here smiling because when you said it's not limited to student teacher or student parent, because I have kids that are in the same grade, they'll have the same teachers but at different time of the day in the same subjects, and they have strengths and weaknesses in different places. If it's a long car ride home from Salt Lake for us, if we have more than one kid in the car, plus my 2, the conversations that take place, I love to just sit there and not say a word, act like the car is moving by osmosis. And the kids will have the most incredible conversations, and I wouldn't have put a label to it, and by that a name to it as such, but they do it almost just inherently with each other, and it's now that I'm more aware of what you're saying here and how to take it a little further, I'll probably listen with different ears now. So it's interesting.
Fantastic. Melanie.
So I heard this thing on NPR, and I was in the car, so I don't really know who it was.
I'm going to make you famous anyway.
Okay,
it's going to be
great.
your idea now.
But basically, they were looking at data for, early 20-somethings entering the workforce, school-age children, and college-age kids, and their association and motivation to reward. And how with every little thing that they do, they expect this, here's what you get, here's what you get. Every time you do something, it's to get something. And it just made me think about this and how, trophy for everybody. And so how does that tie into this?
I think it is groping a cultural shift where the teachers are modeling it and our student leaders are modeling it, that this is a process, and it's about the learning, and it's not about trying to earn every single point that I can. It's about getting better, and it's about learning. And teachers who are using formative assessment effectively in their classes, and the fact that we're focusing on formative assessment is not to suggest that our teachers are not already doing this, because they are, and many of them are quite expert at it, as Alan was talking about. Brian Birchler's class, lots of our teachers are extremely adept at using formative assessment. But we're all trying to model the same growth mindset. Even those teachers who are really good are working hard to get better. And that's why we're having the focus.
I think she was going on a little different tack in terms of how parents and teachers can use rewards. And I'd suggest the book Nurture Shock, which has some great research on that, which showed that if you took some kindergartners and you divided them up and watched them and saw what they like to do, and you noticed these kids, this third of the kids liked to do art, and these third didn't care, and these thirds whatever. So you took these third that liked to do art, and then you divide them into two groups, and you paid, or three groups. You paid one, you told the kids, if you do art in class today, I will give you this reward, a candy, whatever. You took this group and just said, if you do art, at the end of the period, I'm going to give you a reward. And then this group said nothing. The kids that were given rewards, once they took the rewards away, stopped doing art, even though this was their already demonstrated preference to do in class. So you'd given the reward for doing something they like to do, then you took the reward away, they stopped doing it because they thought, well, I should get a reward for doing this. So the message on this was, don't reward their behavior, because then they're going to start thinking the reason I'm going to do this behavior is for the reward, whether that be grades or art or whatever. So that's what I know the story you're talking about. That's what they were talking about in terms of, you want the kid to be self-motivated and not motivated for the reward, because then when you take the reward away, they can be less motivated.
Sometimes, the grades the reward a lot of times, especially in a very academic, competitive environment, So how do you take, because the colleges are still looking at the A's and the B's and the SATs and all of those letters and or numbers. So how do you communicate in an academically competitive environment? Yes, you need this for colleges to look at, but we also want your head over here. Because I'm finding the disconnect in Jonah, where I'm saying these things, but then he is still so connected to that grade.
Well, I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. The focus on growth mindset and formative assessment means that they're going to learn more, and that in the end their grades will be what they want them to be. And I'm not putting a target on there because it depends on the kid and it depends on the class. But they'll have higher achievement in the end if they stop focusing on those points, because then they're going to take risks, then they're going to accept challenges, and they're going to grow more than they would if the whole focus is on the grade.
So can you guys do a workshop
Yeah. How do we get them to focus?
Like, we can all read the book, but I mean, I can read all kinds of books. That doesn't mean I know how to put it into action. You know, I can do my interpretation of it. But is there some sort of workshop that could be put on here where it's like, here are some specific ways to approach this whole thing?
I think we can definitely think about that. There's an excellent resource that I can send anyone and everyone right away. The Carol Dweck's lab at Stanford is called PERTS Lab, P-E-R-T-S, and they have created mindset kits for students, parents, and teachers. And the mindset kits for parents, I have been through them, and I think they're really quite good. And this is a new part of their resources that they're sharing. And Lee and Tyler are passing out a hard copy of some resources. This is from a group that is the commercial sort of wing of Carol Dweck's mindset empire, and it's called Brainology. And this is a product that schools can purchase and use their resources to try to promote growth mindsets. A lot of public schools are using Brainology, especially schools in low-income areas with a lot of at-risk students, because you have the most profound effects targeting those kids, although the effects are potent no matter what the background of the students.
You know, the other thing is, we're not going to get kids not to focus on grades, because grades are reality. I mean, part of the presentation here was that we're not going to tell kids grades don't count, because we know that they do count in terms of, any achievement, whether it grades in school or your performance in work. You know, those measurement things do count. We don't want to work against that. On the other hand, as you learn about this as a teacher, as a parent, as a kid, you do things that can remind you that you want to be stimulated. How many people after Wendell's presentation were more interested in how digestion worked than before? Raise your hand. Okay? If a good teacher takes an opportunity like that, which isn't the way you were taught or I was taught, which the teacher stood up there and just explained digestion, and you kind of had to absorb it or not. At the end of that discussion, we were talking about how we both were more interested in learning about, well, exactly how does digestion work and all that. That happens with kids too. They get their mind away from the grade, and suddenly are really interested in, well, how does digestion work? And if I couldn't eat, what would I do it? Because people are naturally curious. And if you tap into that, you don't say grades don't work, but in fact they learn more because the approach taps into the human's natural curiosity. And you get them not thinking about the grade for the moment. So part of that is the teaching style that changes with this. That how many of you had those kind of exercises when you were in school? Your kids are having many more of those. And I think they stimulate the learning process, get them not focused on the grade, without saying the grade isn't important, the grade is important.
I want to go out on a limb on Melanie's question, because it's not in my job description to talk to high school parents. I work with the middle school kids. And it's not in your job description to talk to other children and other families. You're invested in your child, and you're very close to your child, and the anxiety goes up around these conversations, because how old is Jonah? Oh, I know Jonah. I'm thinking about your older son. Jonah's, and he's already thinking about this, because that's where we are as a culture of the school. But this is where we weren't talking about mindset 5 years ago. I came in from a K-8 school, and this whole college counseling conversation was new to me. And I stepped in it with Al, and I said, Pomona, that's a fallback school. Because in 1987, when I graduated from high school, a lot of kids were getting to Pomona. It is one of the most challenging schools to get into the country. It's an excellent school. It is one of the most challenging schools to get into the country. I think they let in 6% of their applicants or something like that. So one thing I'm always asking parents of middle school and high school when we talk is, don't use your experiences with grades or college as the litmus test for how it is today. Because there are excellent schools, including, that don't have grades at all and are getting their kids into Harvard and Pomona and Westminster and Puget Sound, and excellent schools, and schools you've never even heard of that are excellent schools. So the anxiety around grades is a double-edged sword, because you don't want to feed into it but things, the focus, as I said earlier, if we can get on that learning piece and keep, even if it means a lot to you, modeling in front of your kids isn't helpful. We have about 2 more minutes. Michelle has an announcement. I saw one more hand over here. Did you have a question?
Yeah, my question was, you're taking, I understand the forms of learning, but I don't understand how changing the grades from 1, 2, 3, 4, from an ABC to 1, 2, 3, 4 is going to change the focus that our kids have on grades. We're still going to want our kids, and they're probably still going to want to achieve the 3 grade, which is the roll call standard. Why is it that by changing it from an ABC to a 1, 2, 3, 4, that we are going to get rid of that focus on grades? How is that going to work?
That's a great question, and it leads into, it disappeared. For 6th grade parents and anyone else who's interested, we're doing a deeper conversation about the APC grading system. I don't have the dates. It's a Wednesday night, October 14th at 6:30, and Friday morning at 8:30. It's in the Friday Facts. On how we're using that to develop these habits, because thank you. Those 12 bullet points also have 72 sub-bullets about those are targeted skills we want them to develop. So yes, we have to use, until we go to a point, not until, if we ever went to a point with no grades and only focused on learning with a qualitative assessment system, then they would just do the work and the goal would be learning. But that's a lovely, big dream pie in the sky idea that they're just going to do the work for their love of learning. But we also know what they're doing, these kids, and they do have a target. So for that grading system, for example, we're rewarding them for giving them a strong grade for the growth mindset. We want them to have that carrot. I know we don't like the rewards, but unless you've given me permission, I'll get rid of grades in the middle school, but I don't think that's where we're going anytime soon. This is going to teach them, model for them the kind of learning skills and behaviors and habits we want for them to love learning, to understand their learning. So when they get to the high school and ABCD, it's like, oh, I already know how to do this. And yes, I still want to get an A, but because of the habits they learned, the A's will come easier, but the learning is also going to be prioritized. So that's kind of a pitch for my middle school grading reform conversation next month. But I encourage you to come and ask those questions and be part of that conversation. So, Michelle.
So one of the new initiatives in college counseling that we're doing this year is we're doing a monthly coffee chat with the college counselors. And our topic for October's coffee chat is going to be the growth mindset and the college process. And so continuing this conversation, and many of you are thinking along those lines with regard to grades and the reality that this is going to be part of the consideration for college applications, but it's not the only consideration. The grades and the test scores are part, but more now than ever, we're hearing from college admissions offices that non-cognitive evaluations and descriptions of students, which are growth mindset adjectives, are equally as important and being considered with equal value. And so let's continue this conversation. It's going to be Thursday, October 29th from 8:15 to 9:15 in our upper school cafe for 9th through 12th grade parents. And we'll be able to pick up on some of the college-related growth mindset concerns, curiosities that you have then. So hope you will come.